In this video, we're going to discuss aperture. Aperture affects the light and depth of field of your photos. First, we're going to look at how aperture affects light. To do so, we need to zoom out and look at how aperture, along with two other important camera functions, influence exposure. In photography, exposure is how light or dark your photo is. As you can imagine, it is very important. When a photo is too light or too dark, you can't see the image properly and you can lose valuable details. There are three components that make up what we call the exposure triangle: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. All three of these things affect the lighting of your images, which is arguably the most important element of photography. As I said, in this video, we will be learning about aperture, but first we will briefly go over all three parts of the exposure triangle so that you can see how they work together and keep them in mind. We will go into the other 2 points of the triangle in other videos. Aperture is how wide the lens opens when you take the picture. Shutter speed is how long the lens stays open when you take the picture. ISO is how sensitive the camera's sensor is to light. The lower the ISO number, the less sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. When you shoot in an area with heavy sunshine, you can shoot with a low ISO. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. This is useful when you are shooting in areas with low lighting. However, keep in mind that the higher your ISO number is, the grainier your photo is going to look. To help understand how aperture and shutter speed work together to change the exposure, imagine your lens is an eyeball. The aperture is like the pupil, opening and closing depending on how much light there is. When the eyeball needs more light, the pupil will open up to let more light in. When there is too much light, the pupil gets smaller to let less light in. The shutter speed is like the eyelid, determining how long the light is let in. The longer you go without blinking, the more light will hit your eyeball. The quicker you blink, the less light will hit your eyeball. Now let's talk about aperture specifically. Aperture is measured in f-stops. The f-stop refers to the size that the hole in the lens opens up to. On your camera, you will see the letter F followed by a number. This chart is very important to learn, so let's go over it. The smaller the f-stop number, the bigger the aperture opening. The bigger the f-stop number, the smaller the aperture opening. For example, f1.4 indicates a very wide open aperture, and just like a large pupil, it would let in a lot of light. And f22 indicates a very small opening that would let in much less light, like a tiny pupil. Light is only half of the aperture's job, though. The other function that aperture controls is depth of field. The term depth of field refers to how much of the photo is in focus. Aperture widens or narrows the range of focus, bringing more or less of the photo into focus. The narrower the aperture, the deeper the depth of field, meaning more is in focus. The wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field, meaning less of the image is in focus. f16 is a narrow aperture with a deep depth of field, while f1.4 is a wide open aperture with a very shallow depth of field. A deep depth of field allows the entire image to be in focus, from front to back. This is great for landscape photos. A shallow depth of field adds some blur to the photo, drawing the viewer's eyes to what is in focus in the image. Using a shallow depth of field, you can blur the background or the foreground depending on where you want the focus to be. Have you ever heard the word bokeh? Bokeh is the blur you get from a shallow depth of field. It's the dreamy, soft blur in the background that can make your image look more professional. To recap, aperture controls light and depth of field. A smaller aperture number lets in a lot of light and makes less of the image in focus. A larger aperture number lets in less light and makes more of the image in focus. Here are 3 exercises to help you become familiar with aperture. Number 1, find or set up 3 or more items in a row. Without changing the position of your camera or the items, take a picture at every f-stop that your camera has. Your end result should look somewhat like the example pictures here. Try to be creative. Get familiar with how each f-stop affects the amount of the photo that is in focus. Exercise number 2, using those same items in a row, keep your aperture on the widest setting that your camera has, f1.4 for example, and take a series of photos, focusing on a different item every time. It may be easier to do this using manual focus rather than autofocus. Exercise number 3, take one object and set it about a foot away from a background. Set your camera to the widest aperture setting and take a photo of the object from a few feet away. Then take 2 or 3 more photos of the object while moving the camera closer to it each time. Do this same exercise with the aperture setting on the narrowest f-stop as well. Aperture is an extremely important tool that will help you control the way your photos look. With it, you can make sure an entire landscape is in focus, or you can make your subject matter pop with a beautifully blurred background. Aperture can help you work with the lighting that you have to expose your image exactly the way you want. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions about the aperture function of your camera, and thanks for watching.